So I'd like to welcome Matt Charman, screenwriter of Bridge of Spies. I think we'd start with your career. How did you get into writing? How did you get into the industry? Is it something you always wanted to do? And what was that kind of pivotal moment?
I think I did always want to do it, but I think I probably, in truth, didn't think I was allowed to do it. My mum's a hairdresser and my dad, until he retired, sold tractors. So I didn't know anybody in the business at all. And for a long time, I really loved the idea of writing, but I just thought other people wrote. I thought that I probably wasn't allowed to be a writer. So I studied English at University College London, but I didn't study any creative writing element to it. I studied English literature. But being in London meant that I was right on the doorstep of the West End. So I would go 4 or 5 times a week to see shows, but obviously when you're a student, you can't afford to buy tickets.
Absolutely.
So what I would do is I would wait outside for the interval, and everybody would come outside and either have a smoke or check their phone or whatever.
Clever man.
And I would sneak in. Yeah. Now I realise this is highly illegal and I'm not recommending anybody do this, but the amazing thing was that 4 or 5 times a week, you know, I would go into the theatre, the lights would go down, I'd sit in a spare seat and I would watch a play. And I would see these remarkable performances, but I would have no idea what the first act had been because I'm only watching the second act. So I'd go home, I'd go back to my dorm, I'd lay there in bed, I'd dream up what I thought the first act was. You know, maybe that person was with that guy and they were married and they broke up, and you know, you just play those games with yourself. And I didn't realise it at the time, but that was a brilliant exercise in structure. That was a great way of me working out what that first act was. So when I checked in the library or the Samuel French bookshop the next day and read the first act, I could go, oh, okay, wow, I was totally wrong on that, but I was kind of close on that, and you know.
Yeah.
And those experiences, I realised, came from a place of me clearly wanting to be a writer, clearly enjoying sitting amongst an audience and understanding what an audience need and sometimes what they don't need. You know, sometimes audiences love to not know something.
Totally.
Ever. You know, for it to be completely kept back from them. And so that was the start of me getting a bug of wanting to write. When I left university, I did a bunch of, you know, really crappy jobs, to be honest. And my brother did a really wonderful thing. He got me a job washing cars at a crash repair centre. I would do like 20 cars a day. It was very, very boring, and it gave me a lot of time just to drift off and dream.
Sure.
And I would carry a little notebook around with me and I would keep nipping to the loo, and I started writing stuff down. And I even started, I can remember clearly, looking in someone's car and making up stories about them, about their life, about, you know, who they were, the job they did, from the little things you found. My brain was so hardwired to making stories about people that even those little bits So I started to get up earlier and earlier to write my first play. You know, I was starting work at 6:30, but I ended up getting up at like 4 o'clock to get a couple of hours in before my dad dropped me off. And I submitted that to something called the Verity Bargate Award, which the Soho Theatre run. And there were 700 entries, got longlisted, then down to the shortlist, and then I got this phone call saying, you know, you've won. And it got performed in Soho, the Soho Theatre, for about 5 weeks. It was called A Night of the Dogs, and that was my first real sense of, wow, maybe it's all right, maybe I can do this. Maybe it doesn't have to be other people that write, maybe it can be me that writes. The reason I often go back to that and talk about that is I do think a lot of people starting out feel the business is closed to them, exclusive, that they're not so-and-so's son or they're not related to someone else. And actually, I don't know what your experience has been with the business, but I feel like if you can get your foot in the door, then it becomes about actually the quality of your work and really not about who you know.
I would absolutely agree with you. And it's funny because I can remember those pivotal moments in my career, in my acting career, and doing those things that you did. You know, you took the initiative to write your first play and go and send it out to people.
Yeah.
And similarly, when I was searching for an agent, I remember that kind of pivotal moment of actually kicking myself up the arse and going, right, I'm now going to write these letters because I can't do what I'm doing anymore. I always look back and I go, had I not done that day?
I do think that's a big difference between, it doesn't matter whether you're a writer or an actor or a director or whatever, the key difference is there's a lot of people who have stories to tell or amazing talent. There just needs to come a moment where you're like, I want this so badly that I'm just going to go and make it happen. Absolutely. And I know that sounds sometimes quite American, but actually a little bit of that in your life, of not necessarily waiting for people to tap you on the shoulder, because that just doesn't happen.
It doesn't.
It doesn't happen.
what happens next?
A lot of people saw the play and some agents, but also people from other theatres. The other thing that came out of it was the National Theatre came to see it, and I had a meeting with Nicholas Heitner that I got very nervous before, because I'd seen a lot of plays growing up at the National. He was lovely. He had enjoyed the play and he said, you know, what do you want to do now? And the National have this remarkable resource called the National Theatre Studio, where they give writers space for 8 weeks and a room and, you know, a printer and coffee and a space to go and make something, write a play, research something, whatever you want to do. They gave me 8 weeks in the studio. And I think partly because I'm not from the business and my parents have always worked very hard, I felt very strongly that I needed to write a play in 8 weeks. And so I really worked very hard to write a play. I delivered this play to him. That was something that he saw the potential in, and so that became my first play at the National, and that really started an amazing relationship at the National, who did my next 3 plays.
Sure.
Again, with this business, I think you see a lot of things. The story we get told is that a 19-year-old writes a play, wow. Or a 23-year-old stars in their first movie, and wow, it's incredible.
Yeah.
The message that sends is, if I haven't done something by the time I'm 19, 20, 25, I can't do it.
Yeah.
The door's shut. I've had so many young writers who've come to me and said,
It's too late.
I just feel like it's too late.
Yeah.
And I've said, how old are you? And they're like, 23. And it's just crazy. It is a career, both as a writer and as an actor and anyone, that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
I
And you
absolutely
have to
agree.
take your time, you have to learn, and you have to take every experience that BAFTA gave you, that the National gave me, to just soak it up. You don't know when you're going to use it. It might not be for 5 years, but at some point you'll deploy a little bit that you've learned.
Absolutely.
You know. As I went through theatre and started to write a bit of TV, it was, my craft was being honed. I was getting hopefully better at what I was doing, and that was giving me more confidence. And I think when you gain more confidence, you allow that canvas to grow a bit.
Yeah.
And so I suddenly started to think about things that might be movies, whereas a few years before, maybe I'd have the thought of something that could be a movie and then go, oh, I'm not ready
engaged
yet.
with it.
I'm not ready yet,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So the idea and the freedom to find Bridge of Spies came really out of suddenly being open to film ideas
world.
and to, yeah.
So you have a moment of an inspiration for a story. What's the first thing you do? How do you begin?
Sometimes, to be honest, you write it down and you don't do anything with it for months. You know,
Right.
Ideas have a way of snowballing. It might be a character, it might be an opening scene, it might be a, wow, what if you set something in that hotel or that venue or that. And ideas have a way of accruing, and they build up speed, and then they become so big in your head that you have to write them. So my process is really to be, and I feel strongly about this, always listening, always thinking, always writing stuff down. In terms of ideas themselves, you might suddenly start to research something and go, okay, that's a nice true story angle on that, so I'll now start to look at that. And that's how Bridge of Spies came about. That was a piece of incredibly good fortune, really. I was reading a history book for pleasure. Wow, that sounds... And it was a brilliant book that Robert Dalit wrote called An Unfinished Life. And in this book, there's a chapter on Cuba. And it mentioned a guy called James Donovan, a US lawyer, a guy from New York, who had been sent to negotiate with Fidel Castro. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Didn't really say anything else about him. A little footnote in the book said Donovan first came to prominence for the part he played in a spy swap between Gary Powers and Rudolph Abel. And that was it. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I just thought, wow, there is something here. Who is this guy, ordinary lawyer who's been sent seemingly to do two remarkable things? What's his story? And often, that's all it is. It's just reacting to something in a, I want to know. I just want to know more about this, you know. And I did want to know more, and there wasn't really any definitive account of him as a man. You know, there wasn't a movie, there wasn't a book. There was just, you know, articles, and I started to research the New York Times archive and the Kennedy Presidential Library, and I started to piece together this man's story and everything that had happened to him.
Fantastic.
And the more I progressed, the more I realised this is incredible. This has never been told as a story. And this is, for me, the things that I have always gravitated towards, which is, you know, ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, you know, the kind of people that you might live next door to or see on the bus or whatever. So the process for me with that was to do the work, was to piece it together. It took a year. I was working on other things, you know, I was picking it up again now and again and playing with it, and then I put it down. Now, it might be that I got to the end of that process and thought, there isn't anything here. And you have to take it or leave it. You can't bet the house on every little thought or idea you might have. But as you get slightly more experience, you start to back your own hunches and think, I really think this, I think it's worth me spending a day in the British Library. I think it's worth me, you know, getting on a train and going to that museum to look at that thing. You know, because you are your first audience member. Yeah. And if you think, I'd want to watch this as a movie, then write it, keep going. I think both true stories and things that you just come up with yourself, patience is the word for both of them. Patience and taking your time to let something fully grow. I had a very lucky experience on Bridge of Spies. From the moment of pitching it to the first day of principal photography was 11 months, which is, as you know, very fast. Incredible. Yeah. And I think the writer of Carol, Phyllis Nage, I think it took her, 19 years.
Wow.
From wanting to write that story, wanting to adapt that short story into a film, to the film being released. I mean, that is patience and passion. But now here it is, as a movie, a Cate Blanchett movie, you know, with Academy Award nominations, with all the rest of it.
And getting all the recognition.
Yeah, so it pays to be patient, I guess.
Yeah.
For Bridge of Spies, so I found this story as a footnote in a book, I grew it, I met with James Donovan's son and got his blessing really to walk the story forward and to share the story with producers. I'd found what the movie was, the 3 acts, and I built it into a verbal pitch. And this is something that you don't have to do a verbal pitch, and I've done it the other way, which is you write a document, a story document, you map it out, you talk about the character, you do all the rest of it. For this particular one, I liked the idea of being able to walk into an office and sit down with someone and say, okay, you don't know anything about this particular man I'm about to tell you about. He's been forgotten by history, really, but he was part of something massive and I want to tell you about it. And that connection, that verbal pitch and that connection that you make with someone is very powerful. I learnt it really like a monologue, and I've never acted, but I thought I need to get this in a place where I can do this over and over again. Yeah. It was like a 15, 20-minute verbal pitch. And I was out in Los Angeles meeting people for the first time. And I did 8 pitches a day for 5 days. It was very, very tiring. Part of it was a bit boring, but another part of it was I loved this story so much that I just wanted to find a home for it.
Passion, yeah.
Towards the end of the week, DreamWorks heard it in a diner on Sunset Boulevard. You know, people having pancakes and scrambled egg and really across a little counter. And this executive at DreamWorks heard it and he had a big smile on his face. He said, I'm going to go now and tell this story to Stephen. I think he'd be, you know, as much as I can remember, I'm going to go and tell him. I think this is right up his street. They ended up buying it and I flew home and I had an answer machine message that said, Steven Spielberg wants to hear this story directly from you. Wow. So I felt this was very much a moment and I didn't want to screw it up. So I pitched him over the phone and he was wonderful. He's the nicest, gentlest man, really. He's such a kind guy. And I got to the end of it and he said, look, this is fantastic. When can you write it? And that obviously was incredible and so exciting to me. The reality was much harder because when that phone call finished, DreamWorks then phoned me back immediately and the reality check came and the executive who bought it from me was great, but he was very realistic. He said, look, Stephen wants to make a movie. He hasn't made a movie since Lincoln. By that point, it was kind of a couple of years. He's got 5 scripts that he's looking at. You're very late to the party. All that exists is a pitch in your head. There's no script. You've got 5 weeks. And 5 weeks for a movie like Bridge of Spies, which is complicated and true and a historical movie, was tough. And I thought, okay, I've got this shot, I'm going to go for it. And so I delivered it in the 5 weeks. He read the first draft. He flew me out, a little golf buggy picked me up at Universal Studios and drove me through the lot, drove me to his office at DreamWorks. And he said, okay, let's dig in. And we had the most wonderful couple of hours with him turning every page, talking about every moment, getting incredible notes about deepening the script and the texture and pushing characters. And I flew home and did a new draft. I did a new version of the script, delivered it to him. He read it and he said, okay, I'm going to share this with an actor friend of mine. That's all he said. And a few days later he came back and he said, okay, Tom Hanks has read the script and we're going to make your movie.
What a moment.
And it was, you know, there are still some mornings when I wake up and I forget that and I re-remember it and I'm like, wow, that whole experience, it still feels a bit like a dream, really.
Sure. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Ray.
Cheers, man.
And obviously, Pietro, you have had cut quite a few films with Ridley Scott.
Yes,
like 10?
I think The Martian is the 10th one, yes.
Wow. So what's that like? What are the advantages
I just said
of
that before. It's like marriage, you know? It's like
Right.
people know an editor and director's close, intimate relationship, but I'm saying like a marriage because it has ups and downs. And with Ridley, it's always been, I mean, from our first movie together, one where he gives me a lot of freedom.